My name is Emma, I'm 32 years old, and at my father's will reading, my family laughed when I was left just $15. Before I tell you about the deafening silence that followed when the lawyer announced there was a private letter, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The laughter wasn't a shock. Honestly, I was expecting it. In the grand, polished production of the Reynolds Family, I was always the ghost in the machine, the quiet stagehand ensuring the show went on while everyone else was bathed in the spotlight. My older brother, Marcus, was the leading man, the golden child. He had the Ivy League degree, the corner office waiting for him at my father's real estate firm, and a wife, Stephanie, who looked like she was meticulously assembled from a luxury catalog. My mother, Victoria, was the director, a woman whose entire existence was a performance of social grace, a curator of appearances who valued the family's standing far more than its members. And I was just Emma. The reliable one. The one who would handle things. When my father, Richard, was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer, the roles we played became starkly, cruelly defined. The diagnosis was a ticking clock, a death sentence we all heard loud and clear. But instead of a family rallying together, it was a slow, deliberate scattering. Victoria immediately threw herself into planning for the after. I'd overhear her on the phone with her sister, Judith, their voices hushed but excited, discussing caterers for the funeral reception and what she would wear. It was grotesque. She was planning the party before the guest of honor had even left. Marcus, meanwhile, became a man of immense, sudden importance at work. "I'm buried, Em," he'd say, his voice brisk and impatient over the phone. "This big promotion is on the line. I just can't get away. You understand. Keep me posted." He never asked what he could do. He never asked how I was doing. He just wanted updates, like I was his field reporter on the front lines of our father's decay. So, I did what I always did. I handled it. I packed up my life, my small but sunny Chicago apartment, my burgeoning career as a freelance writer, my half-finished manuscript that was my secret, fervent dream, and I put it all in storage. I moved back into the suffocating silence of my childhood home and became my father's keeper. My days became a blur of medical jargon and hushed consultations. I learned to administer his medications, a complex cocktail of pills that had to be timed to the minute. I learned to flush his four-line, to change his dressings, to talk to the hospice nurses about things like breakthrough pain and end-of-life directives. The head nurse, a wonderfully kind woman named Maria, became my confidant. She saw it all. She saw me reading to him for hours when the pain made sleep impossible, my voice growing hoarse as I journeyed through his favorite old spy novels. She saw me holding a basin for him when he was sick, wiping his brow, and telling him it was okay. And she saw that we were always alone. The rest of the family managed their involvement from a safe, sterile distance. Their critiques and suggestions were delivered like royal decrees, usually through Victoria's perpetually stressed personal assistant, Vanessa. A text would flash on my phone, "Victoria feels you should be pureeing his food." She read an article in a magazine. Another one, "Marcus is concerned about the dosage of the pain medication. He thinks it might be making him too drowsy." They never saw the grimace of pain on his face when he tried to swallow solid food. They never sat in the dark with him while he trembled, not from cold, but from sheer terror of the unknown. They just read articles and had opinions. My childhood friend, Beth, who still lived next door, was my only other lifeline to sanity. She'd lean over the fence while I was trying to get a moment of fresh air in the backyard, her face a mask of concern. "This is wrong, Emma," she said one afternoon, her voice low and furious. "I saw your mother and Stephanie at the club yesterday, laughing over mimosas. It's like they're on vacation." I just shrugged, too exhausted to be angry. "They're processing it their own way," I mumbled, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. But the truth has a way of seeping through the cracks. I started to notice things, small at first, then impossible to ignore. I'd be in the kitchen making Dad a cup of tea, and Marcus would walk in, deep in a hushed phone call. The moment he saw me, his voice would change, becoming loud and breezy. Yeah, just finalizing the numbers on the Henderson deal. Talk soon. But I'd heard the words he'd whispered just before, just need to keep the old man from looking too closely at the books for another few weeks. When I asked him about it, he just laughed, a dismissive, condescending sound. Don't worry your little writer's head about it, Em. It's complex business stuff. My father, who was in the den and had overheard, didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes, and his hand, resting on the arm of his chair, clenched into a fist for a brief second. Another time, a memory from my past resurfaced with a new, horrifying clarity. I was 16 when I slipped on a patch of wet leaves in the driveway and broke my arm. It was a nasty, compound fracture. I remembered sitting in the emergency room for hours, my mother finally arriving with a sigh of annoyance, not a word of comfort. When the doctor showed her the x-ray, she'd glanced at it and said, well, she's always been clumsy. Later, as I lay on the couch, my arm throbbing in its heavy cast, she'd looked at me and said, for heaven's sake, Emma, stop being so dramatic. It's just a little carelessness. Now, as I sat by my father's bedside, gently adjusting his pillows, he looked at the faint, silvery scar on my forearm. He reached out a trembling hand and traced it, his eyes filling with tears. He didn't say a word, but I knew. He was finally seeing. He was remembering. The final, fatal blow to my denial came from Beth. She came over one evening, her face pale, insisting we talk in the pantry, away from any listening ears. I have to tell you something, she whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. Susan, who works at the country club, she served them yesterday. Your mom. And Marcus. They were having a meeting with a lawyer. A man I've never seen before. Not Mr. Bennett. They were talking about power of attorney and estate planning. That was it. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to, that they were just thoughtless, not malicious, snapped. They weren't just neglecting him. They were circling. They were actively plotting his financial demise while I was plotting his medication schedule. 2 days before my father died, I found the document that proved it. I was on his laptop in his study, trying to draft an email to his oncologist. The screen was already on, a Word document left open. It was titled Will Final Draft Confidential. My heart started a frantic, painful drumming against my ribs. I knew I shouldn't look. It felt like a violation. But I couldn't stop myself. My hand trembled as I moved the mouse and began to scroll. It was a systematic dismantling of my father's legacy and a complete erasure of me. The family home, the extensive investment accounts, all to my mother, Victoria. The business, Reynolds Real Estate, the company he had built from nothing, along with his entire stock portfolio, to my heir, Marcus. Even the vacation property at the lake, a place filled with my happiest childhood memories, was bequeathed to my opportunistic cousins, Diane and James, who had done nothing but flatter and fawn for months. And then, I saw my name. Emma Reynolds. The words that followed felt like a physical blow. To my daughter, Emma, for her services, I bequeath the sum of $15. $15. Not even enough for a cab ride home. It was a joke. A cruel, final, dismissive joke. It was the value they had placed on my sacrifice, on my love, on my entire existence within that family. That night, after Maria arrived for her shift and I knew my father was settled, I drove. I didn't have a destination. I just ended up in the deserted parking lot of a local park. I turned off the engine, and the silence was absolute. And in that silence, I shattered. The grief I had been holding back for months, the bone-deep exhaustion, the searing humiliation, the years and years of being made to feel small and insignificant, it all came pouring out in a flood of ragged, ugly sobs. I wept until my throat was raw and my head pounded. And then, when there were no tears left, something else took their place. The hollowed-out space inside me began to fill with something cold, hard, and heavy. It was rage. A pure, clarifying rage that burned away all the hurt and confusion. They thought I was a doormat. They were about to find out that doormats can be made of steel. My mind, suddenly sharp, started racing. I remembered the smart speaker in Dad's home office. A gift from Marcus 2 Christmases ago. "So you can listen to your old music, Dad," he'd said with a magnanimous smile. I remembered the jokes people made about those devices, how they were always listening. It was a crazy, desperate, one-in-a-million shot. I drove back to the house, my hands steady on the wheel. I slipped inside, my footsteps silent on the thick carpets. In the dark of the study, the glow of the laptop screen felt like a spotlight. My fingers flew across the keyboard, logging into Dad's account, navigating to the device settings, to the activity history. It was a long list of mundane requests. Play Frank Sinatra. What's the weather in Naples? Set a timer for 10 minutes. I scrolled and scrolled, my hope beginning to fade. And then I saw it. A single, anomalous file from the afternoon of the supposed meeting with the new lawyer. It was 5 minutes and 23 seconds long, labeled simply audio clip uncategorized. It was time-stamped. It was from an accidental activation. My blood ran cold as I clicked the play button. The sound was tinny, slightly muffled, but the voices were horrifyingly clear. The clinking of ice in glasses. Then, my mother's voice, sharp and imperious. "The point is to have the paperwork ready to file the second Richard is declared incompetent. We can't have Emma getting any sentimental ideas and blocking the sale of the house." Then Marcus, his voice slick with greed. "Bennett is too much of an old loyalist. This new guy understands the urgency. Once I have full control of the business, I can leverage the assets for that new development project. The promotion is practically a sure thing. The board will have to recognize my value." They went on, their words weaving a tapestry of such profound selfishness it took my breath away. They talked about my father not as a husband or a parent, but as a roadblock. A financial problem whose inheritance needed to be secured. My decision was made in that instant. I saved the audio file to a secure, encrypted flash drive. The next morning, I went to my father's room. He was awake, and for the first time in days, his eyes were completely lucid. I didn't say a word. I sat on the edge of his bed, placed a single earbud in his ear, and pressed play on my phone. I watched his face as he listened. I saw the flicker of confusion, followed by the dawning horror. I saw the last traces of denial crumble, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. And then, I saw that sorrow harden into the same cold, steely resolve that was now coursing through my own veins. When the recording finished, he looked at me, his grip on my hand surprisingly strong. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Once. It was all the permission I needed. That afternoon, I called Mr. Bennett, my father's trusted lawyer for over 30 years. He was a kind, dignified man who had always treated me with warmth, teaching me chess in his office on long afternoons while I waited for Dad to finish work. "Mr. Bennett," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "My father and I need to see you. It's urgent. And it needs to be completely, unequivocally, confidential." The 3 weeks between the funeral and the will reading were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I was silent, a ghost in their house, and they mistook my silence for surrender. Their arrogance grew with each passing day. They became careless, discussing their plans in front of me as if I were a piece of furniture. "I'm thinking of turning your father's study into a yoga room," Victoria announced one morning over breakfast, not even looking at me. "It has the best morning light." Marcus was worse. He'd stride around the house on his phone, talking loudly about his future. "Of course the kids' college fund is secure," he boasted to someone. "Once the estate is settled, we'll be more than comfortable. In fact, Stephanie and I are thinking of a trip to Tuscany to celebrate." Behind their backs, my own plans were moving forward with quiet efficiency. Mr. Bennett was a rock. He was horrified by what I'd shown him, but his professional demeanor never wavered. He worked with a swift, discreet precision that was breathtaking to watch. Documents were drafted, signed by my father with a firm hand, witnessed by Maria and a notary Mr. Bennet brought to the house late one night. The tension was a constant, high-pitched hum beneath my skin. The plan was a fragile, intricate thing, and I was terrified it would all fall apart. The hum spiked into a screaming alarm one afternoon when Mr. Bennet called me, his voice carefully neutral. "Emma, I thought it best to inform you. Your mother telephoned the office this morning." My heart felt like it stopped. "What did she want?" I whispered. "She was inquisitive," he said, a world of meaning in that single word. "She was asking about the estate's final valuation, pushing for details about the liquidity of certain assets. She mentioned needing to make plans." He paused. "I assured her that everything was proceeding as expected, according to your father's last officially filed will. I believe she was satisfied. Don't you worry, my dear. We are on solid ground." But I did worry. It was a sign of their impatience, their greed. It felt like they were closing in, and the day of the reading couldn't come soon enough. Finally, it arrived. The air in Mr. Bennet's polished, wood-paneled office was thick with the cloying scent of expensive perfume and false grief. Victoria was the star of the show, the tragic widow in elegant black, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a silk scarf. Marcus and Stephanie sat beside her, a matched set of smug entitlement, already tapping away on their phones. My cousins, Diane and James, were practically vibrating with anticipation, whispering about renovation plans for the lake house. Beth sat next to me, a small, warm, solid presence in a room full of sharks. Her hand rested on my arm, a silent promise of support. Mr. Bennet, looking somber and dignified, cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was a calm monotone as he went through the standard bequests. The house to Victoria. The business to Marcus. The vacation property to Diane and James. And then he paused. He looked down at the document, then up, over his glasses, directly at me. "And to my daughter, Emma Reynolds, I bequeath the sum of $15. The room exploded. Not in a loud roar, but in something far more cruel. A wave of stifled snickers, of poorly suppressed giggles. I saw Victoria's lips curl into a triumphant smirk behind her scarf. I saw Marcus lean back in his chair, puffing out his chest, the very picture of a conquering hero. Stephanie shot a look at Diane that was pure, unadulterated mockery. They were laughing. Laughing at me. Laughing at my devotion, at my sacrifice, at my perceived worthlessness. I sat perfectly still, my face a blank mask, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. I met Beth's furious, protective gaze and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. As the last of the snickering died down, Mr. Bennet adjusted his glasses. He let the silence stretch for a beat, then another. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the smug atmosphere like a shard of ice. "There is a codicil. A private letter, addressed only to Emma." The silence that followed was a different beast entirely. It was heavy, suffocating, electric with shock. Every single eye in the room swiveled to me. Victoria's smirk vanished as if it had been wiped from her face. Marcus sat bolt upright, his brow furrowed in a dark line of confusion and suspicion. Mr. Bennet slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table. My name was written on it in my father's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting. With hands that I willed to be steady, I took the letter. I broke the seal. The paper felt heavy, important. I unfolded it and began to read aloud, my voice clear and strong, ringing with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "To my daughter Emma," I began, my eyes scanning the room. The only one who saw me as a person in the end, and not a problem to be solved or an account to be drained. You were the one who held my hand when the lights were off and the fear was close. You were the one who brought me dignity when everyone else was bringing their lawyers. I saw Victoria flinch, her back ramrod straight. Marcus's face was a thundercloud. I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. You were overlooked, but you were the only one who was truly looking. You saw the truth when I could not, or would not, see it myself. And for that, you inherit my truth. The others can have the wealth. It seems to be all they ever truly wanted from me. I looked up, my gaze sweeping over their stunned, furious faces. Then I folded the letter neatly and handed it back to Mr. Bennet. A sentimental fool to the end, Marcus scoffed, the first to recover his voice. That proves nothing. A piece of paper. He was clearly not in his right mind, Victoria added, her voice sharp with accusation. It's obvious that Emma manipulated him in his weakened state to write that nonsense. Mr. Bennet let their words hang in the air for a moment, like poison gas. On the contrary, Mrs. Reynolds, he said calmly. The letter is merely an introduction. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, blue, bound document, placing it on the table with a heavy, final thud that echoed in the silent room. 2 months before his death, Mr. Reynolds, in full command of his faculties and with witnesses present, established a second, private, and irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary is Emma Reynolds. He paused, looking at each of them in turn. The total value of the assets in this trust, as of this morning, is $3.5 million. The room imploded. What? Victoria shrieked, leaping to her feet, her grieving widow facade crumbling to reveal the screeching fury beneath. That's impossible. He was on morphine. We will contest this. This is elder abuse. She manipulated him. Marcus was on his feet too, his face a blotchy, terrifying shade of purple. I want to see those documents. This is illegal. Our lawyer will tear this to shreds. Stephanie, ever the efficient partner, was already dialing frantically on her phone. Mr. Bennet remained an island of calm in their hurricane of rage. He held up a hand, and with a quiet authority that silenced them mid-shout, he spoke. You mentioned manipulation, he said, his eyes fixed on Victoria. Mr. Reynolds was concerned you might feel that way. He was very concerned that his final wishes be understood with absolute clarity. He turned to the large television screen mounted on the wall, a screen normally used for business presentations. Which is why he left this. He pressed a button on a small remote. The screen flickered to life. And there was my father. He was gaunt, yes, sitting in his favorite armchair in his study, but his eyes were sharp and clear, and his voice, when he spoke, was firm and resonant. If you are watching this, my father said, looking directly into the camera, it means I am gone. And it means my family has likely acted just as I predicted they would. He took a slow breath. For years, I was blind. I chose to be. I saw what I wanted to see. A successful son. A society wife. I didn't see the son who was systematically bleeding my company dry with creative accounting to fund a lifestyle he had not earned. He looked pointedly to one side, and on the screen next to him, a bank statement appeared, with several large, questionable transfers circled in red. Marcus looked like he'd been physically struck. I didn't see the wife, my father continued, his voice cracking with an old, deep pain, who was so obsessed with appearances that she couldn't show her own 16-year-old daughter a shred of basic human kindness after a painful injury. Victoria sank back into her chair as if her bones had dissolved, her face ashen. And I certainly never thought, he said, his voice now dropping, filled with a cold, hard iron, that I would live to see the day that my own wife and son would meet with a lawyer behind my back to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could seize control of my assets. A meeting that took place while my daughter, Emma, was taking me to a chemotherapy appointment. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. But my daughter showed me the truth. She didn't come to me with accusations. She came to me with proof. She came to me with your own words. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that returned was different. It wasn't suspenseful. It was the profound, airless silence of a tomb. the silence of complete and utter ruin. Slowly, I rose from my chair. I nodded to Beth and Maria, who had been standing quietly in the corner of the room, my silent, steadfast witnesses. I walked toward the door. As I passed my mother, she grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin like talons. Her face was a twisted mask of disbelief and fury. "How long?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "How long have you been planning this?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back into her wild, uncomprehending eyes. I gently but firmly removed her grip. "Longer than you'll ever know," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I learned from the best. I learned from watching all of you, how to wait, how to document, how to protect myself. The only difference is, I did it with the truth." I walked past Marcus. He was frozen, staring blankly at the dark screen. He finally sputtered, his voice cracking, You'll hear from my lawyer." I didn't even grant him a look. I put my arm around Beth's shoulders, a real smile, the first in months, finally reaching my lips. "Let's go," I said to her. "I'm suddenly very hungry." And with that, I walked out of the room, out of the building, and out of that life forever. I left them to drown in the wreckage they had created. I didn't look back. In the months that followed, I built a new life, piece by piece, on my own terms. The first piece was a small, weathered cottage on the coast of Maine, a place that smelled of salt and pine and freedom. It was quiet, the only sounds being the rhythmic crash of waves on the shore and the cry of gulls overhead. The second piece was my novel. In the peaceful solitude of my new home, the words that had been locked inside me for years finally came pouring out. It was a family drama, of course. It was published the following year and won a few awards, which was nice. But the most important thing was that it was mine. I had created something from the ashes. The third, and most important, piece was a foundation I established using a portion of the inheritance. We provided grants, resources, and respite care services to people who were caring for terminally ill family members. I named Maria as its first executive director. It was my way of turning the ugliest chapter of my life into something of value, something that could offer the support to others that I had so desperately needed myself. News from my old life trickled in occasionally, usually through Beth during her visits. Marcus's financial improprieties had, as my father predicted, caught up with him. An internal audit, launched after the change in ownership, uncovered years of embezzlement. He lost his job, the coveted promotion, and was facing serious legal charges. Victoria had been forced to sell the Grand family home to cover their legal debts. She had tried to contest the will, but when Mr. Bennett's office formally responded that they would be happy to submit the audio recording as evidence in court, she had quietly and quickly withdrawn the suit. She left me a few long, rambling, tearful voicemails about the importance of family and the power of forgiveness. I listened to the first one, then I changed my number. To my complete surprise, Harold, my dad's old business partner, sent me a letter. It wasn't long, but it was a heartfelt, handwritten apology for his blindness and his distance during my father's illness. He enclosed a substantial check made out to the foundation. It was the only piece of my past I acknowledged. I didn't respond to any of it. My new life didn't have room for ghosts. The only connections I maintained were with Mr. Bennett, who would visit for a weekend of chess and quiet conversation, and with Beth, who would bring laughter and salty air and news from a world that felt a million miles away. One evening, I was sitting on my small porch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about the deafening silence in that lawyer's office. I used to think silence was simply the absence of sound. But I'd learned that there are so many different kinds of silence. There's the heavy silence of being ignored, the tense silence of secrets, and the explosive silence of a room after the truth has finally detonated. But this, I realized, as I looked out at the endless, powerful ocean, this was a new kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was full. It wasn't just peace. It was freedom. The quiet girl had finally found her voice, and now, she could choose to use it however and whenever she wanted. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way through. It means the world to me to be able to share it. My question for you is, have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to find your own strength and stand up for yourself when no one else would? I'd love to read about your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more.